Helpful for life. Now, full disclosure, I've only made roux a couple of times in my life, so the mac and cheese you're about to see me do, I actually did that without much research at all. After I made it though, I had all kinds of questions. I took those questions, I did a lot more research online, I spoke with a chef as well as a food scientist to figure out the answers to all of my nagging roux questions. So let's analyze the replay and I can tell you what I did well and what I could have done better. So you're going to want to start off with an empty skillet or saucepan. We're going to use a pot because we're actually going to dump our macaroni in here right after we finish making the sauce so we can have a delicious mac and cheese. You can also make a roux in the oven, but it takes much longer. The plus side, however, is that you don't have to stir it as often. So if that interests you, look it up online. But back to our stovetop version. You're going to want to put it on medium-low heat. Once you cook roux more and get used to recognizing the different stages, you can use a higher heat, but we're going to start with a lower heat for now because that gives you more margin for error. All right, put your fat in to allow it to heat up. In this case, we're using half a stick of butter, which is 1/4 of a cup. You want the butter to finish singing, which is that nice bubbly sound you hear. That singing is that water boiling out of the butter. So all you're left with in the end is just the fat. Once it's done singing, but before it gets brown, sprinkle in your flour. This is 1/4 cup of all-purpose flour. Now whisk. While you're making the roux, you're going to want to whisk near constantly. You can also use a wooden spatula. However, make sure you don't use metal on your non-stick pans. You don't want to mess up that non-stick surface. If you don't whisk well, you could end up with clumps of flour, which makes for a lumpy sauce. Now it's just a matter of time. Here are some rough guidelines. Obviously, this varies a lot based on your heat, your pan, and how much you're cooking. And by the way, people may classify each of these slightly different, but here's one version for you. Again, you'll see that the longer you cook, the darker the flavor gets, but the thickening power starts to go away. All right, as you're cooking your roux, if you ever see any black specks, that's burnt flour, and you're going to want to start over. Don't worry about it too much though. Butter and flour are cheap, and it only takes a couple of minutes to whip up a new one. Besides color, another way to tell what stage your roux is at is by using smell. For the white roux, it should smell like a cooked pie crust. Mac and cheese does best with the white roux, so ideally we would have stopped it around here, but as you'll see, we actually end up overcooking it a little bit. Again, if you want a darker roux to get that richer flavor, that's perfectly fine. Just know that you may need a little more roux to achieve the thickness that you want. And in our case, the mac and cheese still got to a good thickness, and the flavor was good as well. So it all worked out. Remember, you can always add more roux if it's not thick enough. So some people say to add your seasonings now directly to the roux, but I actually would recommend against it. As you can see, I added my seasonings now, and it led to my roux getting a little darker than I wanted. That's because the roux was still cooking as I took the time to add the seasonings. Also, some spices can burn if they're put in a roux that's really hot. Obviously, you can take the roux off the heat and let it cool some, but you're not really gaining anything by adding the seasonings now versus just adding them to the sauce. Plus, you can season the sauce to taste. Would you rather repeatedly taste a roux, which is just flour and butter, or would you rather taste the sauce? I thought so. Et voila! You have made a roux. Now let's look at how to turn that roux into a sauce so we can get on to that delicious mac and cheese.